Around 6 months ago, I bought a camera that I was very interested in for a long time. That camera is the Fujifilm X-Pro 3. I knew about this camera for a while and I decided, hey, I'm going to buy it. A few weeks after that, I made a video called The Pros and Cons of the X-Pro 3. This video went a bit crazy for me, not in the grand scheme of YouTube, but like crazy for me, just me as a creator. It got over 1,000 views pretty quickly and that has never happened to me before. Since it's been just over 6 months, I thought I'd revisit the X-Pro 3 and talk about whether I agree with the points that I made or not. To start off, I'll talk about the screen. While the screen is very cool and I do like how it looks, I think it is a bit gimmicky, since it's not the most functional thing when it comes to using the camera. A lot of the time when I'm using the camera, I would like to just be able to hold it here and take a photo looking at the screen where it's nice and flush into the camera rather than it flipped down. I wish that they made a way where you could flip the camera screen down, twist it and put it back up. That would make this camera so much better than it is. So do I still like the screen as much as I did before? No, I think it's really gimmicky. I think it's a bit annoying to use and it's not practical whatsoever. Now moving on to the optical and electronic viewfinder. Do I still really like them? Yes and no. When I first got this camera, I was addicted to the optical viewfinder. I absolutely loved it. But as time has gone on, I realised that it's not exactly the most practical way of taking photos. While it feels nicer than using the EVF, the electronic viewfinder, it's not as practical. You don't get to see what your image is going to look like since you are just looking through a window in the camera. But if you're using the EVF, it's the same as using like a DSLR where you're looking through the lens and you are seeing exactly what your camera is going to capture. As time has gone on, I have much preferred using the EVF over the OVF, since it is a bit annoying to find out after you've taken the photo, and like a decent while after as well, because you're not looking down at the screen, that the photo you thought you took looked nothing like what you imagined, since the camera viewed the scene differently to how you viewed it in real life. Whereas if I was using the EVF, I could change the settings and change the exposure relatively easily to get the look that I want and not have to worry that my image isn't going to look how I planned. It is still nice using the optical viewfinder and it does give you that more retro feel, but you're not really getting exactly what you shoot. So do I still like the optical viewfinder / electronic viewfinder? Yes and no. It's not how I imagined it to be after this amount of time, which is exactly why I'm making this video. At that time, I thought the optical viewfinder was amazing and it was the best thing ever and I hated the EVF. But now, I much prefer the EVF over the OVF. When you get an X-Pro 3, you are most likely going to be obsessed with that optical viewfinder like I was, and then over time realise that it's not the most practical of things. It's still very fun, but it's a bit gimmicky, like the screen. Now what do I think about the ergonomics? When I first got this camera, I loved how small it was, and I loved where the buttons were, I loved the dials, and I loved the aperture ring, and my opinions have pretty much stayed the same, relatively. The only difference is I really do not like the ISO dial. It's so annoying and I mainly keep it on automatic because I hate it that much. If it was just like another dial like the shutter speed or the exposure compensation, then it would be completely fine and this camera would be amazing. But it's the fact that you have to lift up the little like ring and then turn it, and you're most likely going to slip while doing that, and it's very hard to like get to which one you want to get to very quickly. It's just so annoying, and it's probably the thing that I dislike most about this camera. But other than that, the ergonomics are amazing and you will love them. You will really love them, especially the aperture ring. That thing is amazing. I don't think I've ever had more fun with a camera while I'm just turning the aperture ring and just getting the exact aperture I want, rather than, you know, turning a little scroll reel and finally getting to the aperture. I could be like, oh, there's the aperture, bam, done. It's also really fun to mess with when you're bored. I just sit there just turning it, as well as the focus wheel. It's quite fun. Do I still think the autofocus is good? Yes, it's not amazing, like I said before, it's just good. It's good enough. It will get you good results. It's not the fastest autofocus and it won't be able to track you if you're running through a bunch of obstacles, but it will be able to track your face if you're just not doing insane movements. It can also focus very fast and a lot faster than the Canon 80D, which I'm recording with right now. Even on the camera's movie mode, which you're not really meant to use that much, since it is built for photography, it can focus better than my 80D, and I should use it a lot more since it is 4K as well. So to sum it up, yes, the autofocus is still amazing and a lot better than people say. Everyone's always like, oh, the autofocus is terrible with Fuji cameras. It's really good. They're just used to, the highest of end Canon cameras or the Sony cameras, which can track you from a million miles away through 10 different trees that are completely obscuring your face. Like they're used to that stuff. They're not used to slower DSLRs like I'm used to. And when you're comparing it to that, which a lot of people are going from that to a Fuji, then yes, it is amazing. It's so good, but it's just not as good as those higher end mirrorless cameras like the EOS R or the Sony A7 cameras, like not anything like that. The one thing that I really didn't like when I got this camera was the battery life, but that's because I was using the camera for multiple hours in one day non-stop. When you look at it like that, the battery life isn't great. But now that I've gotten used to the camera and I've figured out my settings and what works for me, the battery life is pretty good. It's not great, it's still pretty bad, but it's still good enough to get you through a whole day of shooting. Bear in mind that is not shooting constantly and leaving the camera on and doing all that. It's just going to be shooting for like a day, maybe getting a few photos, turning the camera off, walking on, getting a few photos, turning the camera off, walking on, that sort of shooting, which I think is a lot more casual and a lot more realistic when we're talking about battery life. But if you're doing what I was doing when I first got the camera and I was out for like 7 hours shooting, not having the camera turned off at all and just continuously shooting every 5 minutes, then yes, the battery life can be pretty bad. And I am glad I did buy another battery since it is very useful for when the battery does die. But I haven't charged the camera for the past week and I've been using it, I'd say 3 days out of that week for a few hours each time, and one of them, it was quite a few hours of just constantly using the screen because I couldn't see very well and the camera has only just got to low battery. So do I still think the battery life isn't great? It's not great, but it's not as bad as I was saying before. I think it's still not the best, but it is extremely usable and will last you a decent amount of time. The only thing that I have to say is I have my camera set up to save battery life. I have the LCD brightness down quite a bit. I also use the optical viewfinder whenever I can. I'm not saying I use it all the time. I still use the EVF more than I use the OVF, but whenever I'm really wanting to save battery, I will use the OVF. Anyway, that is going to be the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed and I want you to check out my next video because it's going to be about this beast here. This is the Fujifilm GFX50S with the Mitakon 65mm 1.4. I bought this to replace my medium format photography since I bought that camera after watching a video by Carl McDougall about the Mitakon 65mm 1.4. Since it looks so close to the Pentax X7, I knew I wanted it, and I wanted it to replace my actual Pentax X7 since this is my favourite film camera and film is getting a bit too expensive now, so I thought it would be wise to find an alternative, and it does just that. Make sure to keep a lookout for that video. I'm going to make it soon, and yeah, I shall see you in that video. Bye bye.